Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most dramatic collapses in all of financial history. We're talking about a single day that completely wiped out fortunes and brought the Roaring Twenties to a sudden, crashing halt.
So, let's set the scene. The date is Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. Now, this wasn't just, another day on Wall Street. Nope, this was a turning point, one that would literally reshape the American economy for generations.
And this day, well, it would go down in history as Black Tuesday. In just a single trading session, all that incredible optimism of an entire generation, it just, poof, evaporated. We're talking billions of dollars in wealth, people's entire life savings, their dreams, it all just vanished into thin air.
So the big question is, how could something like this even happen? I mean, how did it all go so spectacularly wrong? To really get it, we need to rewind. We've got to go back to the decade that basically set the stage for the whole disaster.
All right, Section 1, the Roaring Twenties Gamble, an era of endless optimism. And let me tell you, the 1920s were, well, they were a party. It was a time of this incredible, unprecedented boom. You had factories just churning out amazing new technologies like cars and radios. Wages were going up, and getting credit was super easy. The whole country was just swept up in this feeling that, hey, the party was never going to end.
And all of that confidence, it spilled over and created something totally new, the everyday investor. See, for the first time ever, playing the stock market wasn't just for the super wealthy Wall Street types. It became this national obsession, kind of fueled by this massive fear of missing out. You had teachers, factory workers, clerks, you name it, all jumping in and buying stocks, thinking it was their one-way ticket to getting rich quick.
So what was fueling all this? Well, the engine driving this crazy speculation was a super risky practice called buying on margin. Think of it like a get-rich-quick scheme for stocks. It meant you could borrow up to 90% of the money you needed, so you'd put down just a little bit of your own cash and control a huge portfolio. As long as the market was going up, hey, you look like a financial genius. But if it went down, you were suddenly on the hook for a ton of money you didn't actually have.
And people were so sure this would last forever. The belief was so strong that a famous economist, Irving Fisher, made this declaration just weeks before the whole thing came crashing down. The thinking was, the good times are here to stay. But the reality? That prosperity was actually just a massive, incredibly fragile bubble waiting to pop.
Okay, Section 2, from panic to collapse, the unraveling. So that permanently high plateau, yeah, turns out it was anything but permanent. In late October 1929, that bubble didn't just spring a leak, it burst. And it did so with spectacular, terrifying force over the course of just 1 week.
You know, it's interesting. The whole collapse didn't just happen in one big bang. It was more like a series of tremors that led to a massive earthquake. It all started on Black Thursday, when a big wave of selling really shook everyone's confidence. Then, for the next few days, some major banks actually tried to step in and prop up the market, but honestly, it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. By the time Black Tuesday rolled around, the panic was just unstoppable.
Just picture this. On that one day, a record-shattering 16 million shares got dumped onto the market. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was trying to sell at the exact same time. And the problem? There was nobody left to buy. The ticker tapes that reported the prices fell hours behind, so people had absolutely no idea how much money they were losing until it was far, far too late. It was pure chaos.
And this really gets to the core of the problem. The market back then was like a high-wire act with absolutely no safety net. There were no circuit breakers to pause trading and let everyone catch their breath. There was no insurance to protect your savings if your bank went under. So when the market fell, it took everything and everyone down with it. A total freefall.
All right, Section 3, crash, not the cause, revealing a deeper sickness. So here's a really common myth that you've probably heard, that the 1929 crash single-handedly caused the Great Depression. But you know what? The truth is a lot more complicated than that. The crash was really more of a trigger, not the root cause.
The way to think about it is this. The crash wasn't the disease. It was the most dramatic symptom. It was the moment that ripped the Band-Aid off an economy that only looked healthy on the surface. Underneath, it revealed this deep sickness that had actually been growing for years.
So, what were those real underlying problems? Well,
It was like a perfect storm, a really toxic mix of things. For one, factories and farms were producing way more stuff than people could actually buy. At the same time, you had all this easy credit, which meant tons of people were deep in debt. And to top it all off, the whole thing was built on this shaky, unregulated banking system. The economy of the Roaring '20s, it was basically a house of cards.
And Black Tuesday, that was the big gust of wind that knocked that whole house of cards over. As the banks started to fail and factories closed their doors, the consequences were just devastating. I mean, look at these numbers. Unemployment went from a pretty healthy 3.2% in 1929 to an unbelievable 24.9% just 4 years later. Just let that sink in. 1 in every 4 working Americans was out of a job. It's just catastrophic.
Okay, let's move on to our final section, Building Financial Safeguards, Lessons from the Rubble. So after a national trauma like this, the government really had no choice but to step in. They took some truly historic steps to rebuild the entire system, to make sure a disaster of this magnitude could never, ever happen in the same way again.
And this, right here, is probably the most important legacy of the whole crisis. Major reforms were put into place. You got the Securities Act, which forced companies to actually be honest about their finances. Then the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, was created to act as a cop on the beat for the market, and maybe most importantly for everyday folks, the FDIC was created to insure your bank deposits. For the very first time, a real financial safety net was built for the American people.
So there's no question this crisis forged lasting changes that still shape our financial world today. But it also leaves us with a really critical question to chew on. The system we have now was rebuilt to fight the last crisis. As our economy gets more complex and changes, we really have to ask ourselves, are those same safeguards born out of the 1930s enough to protect us from whatever the next crisis might be?